The Cedo, one of the best shotguns in Warframe, just got its Prime version. However, in the past, there have been situations where if a weapon was really good, the Prime version only saw negligible stat increases on stuff that wasn't even important in the first place. Yes, I'm looking at you, Phantasma. And given the popularity of the base Cedo in the past, many players out there, including me, were worried it might suffer a similar fate. So, did that happen? Or is the Cedo Prime a worthy upgrade to one of the all-time greats? Well, after a huge shout out to all our generous channel members who helped me keep the lights on, let's find out. Now, first of all, I would usually start out giving you a rundown of what the Cedo even is and how it works. However, given the fact that I already made a detailed video on the base Cedo not too long ago, I want to keep it short here and only give you a very brief summary of what we're dealing with. The Cedo Prime is a fully automatic shotgun, but it also has an alt-fire mode that shoots out an explosive disc which bounces between enemies and inflicts random status effects on them. In addition to that, the Cedo has a unique trait that gives you more base damage depending on how many different status effects are on the enemy, and that already makes pretty clear how this thing's supposed to be used. You shoot the alt-fire to inflict many different status effects, and then mow down everything in full auto, benefiting from the massive damage bonus that you gain from all the elements being applied to the enemies. Again, if you want to learn about the mechanics in more detail, make sure to also check out my base Cedo guide. But alright, let's now talk about the reason why you're probably here, that being the comparison between the Cedo Prime and its base version, and also how much better the Prime actually is. The first difference I want to talk about would be polarities. The Cedo Prime comes with 2 innate V plus a D polarity slot. This is very nice, but given the fact that the base Cedo already has 2 V polarities, it's not that much of a difference. However, for me personally, the D polarity was very convenient because you usually want to run Galvanized Savvy on the Cedo, and that is a perfect match, reducing the amount of Forma that I needed for my Steel Path build from 5 on the base Cedo to just 3 on the Prime. But don't worry, I know you. You're not here for the Forma comparison, you want to talk damage. So let's do that next. First of all, the Cedo Prime got a crit boost, having its crit chance increased from 20 on the base version to 24% on the Prime. Just so you have a better comparison, if you were to use critical deceleration as your crit mod, that would net you a final crit chance of 60% on the normal. However, on the Prime, you would be at 72, and that is a noticeable difference. However, crit is not where it ends. We also got an increase in the base damage from 30 to 32 per pellet. At first, this doesn't sound like all too much, but given the fact that we also get an increase in multi-shot from 6 to 7 pellets fired per burst, that means the total damage of the Cedo Prime is now 224 per shot versus the 180 on the base, which is around about a 25% increase in damage. But alright, with the crit and the damage boost, the Cedo Prime already packs a noticeably higher punch than the base version. However, what really surprised me on the Prime was not necessarily the damage output itself, but rather the added convenience. Here's what I mean. The Cedo is a fully automatic shotgun, but you probably want to use critical deceleration as your crit mod, which means, especially on the base Cedo, without a fire rate mod, it feels very slow and uncomfortable to play. The Prime though also got a little fire rate increase up to 4.5 shots per second, which in my personal opinion makes the whole thing much more convenient to play. And as if that's not enough, we also got an increase in reload speed, reducing the time for a full reload from 2.2 to only 1.8 seconds. So overall, the stat increases make the Cedo Prime a stronger weapon in terms of damage, as well as much more convenient to play with less downtime. But now, before we go on to the next topic, whether it's worth it to upgrade or not, there is one sneaky little difference that the devs got in here, which really caught my eye and might just be a little game changer for the Cedo. See, in the past, the alt-fire, the exploding discs, were basically just a status priming tool. Their damage was low and they basically had 0 crit performance. However, on the Prime, all of a sudden they increased the crit chance from 2 to 10%, that's a 500% increase, and also the crit multiplier was buffed from 1.4 to 2x. So with critical deceleration, you would be looking at 30% crit chance at a 4.2x multiplier. Now, don't get me wrong, this is certainly not the world, and it's also definitely not going to be a new meta to play the Cedo primarily into Altfire. However, in comparison to before, it might actually be a viable tactic now to go for it, especially if you maybe have a Cedo Riven with even more crit chance and crit damage on. I unfortunately don't have a Riven myself, otherwise I would have tested it, but in case you have one, then maybe you want to do a test on it and let us know in the comments down below how it worked out. And as always, if you could maybe subzoom your mouse cursor over the like button, that would be super awesome because it helps me big time with the YouTube algorithm. Cheers so much for your support. But alright, now that we know what the differences between the normal Cedo and the Prime are, let's now answer the question that you probably came here for. How good is the Cedo Prime really, and is it maybe even worth upgrading? Well, first of all, the good news is, no, the Cedo Prime did not suffer the Phantasma Prime fate. It got noticeable stat increases across the board, which increased the overall damage output in the double digits, as well as give us more convenience while playing. So, in case you don't have any Cedo yet, then the Prime is definitely the better option to go for. Do not invest in the normal one anymore. However, and I also want to make that one really clear, the base Cedo is still a very strong shotgun, probably still one of the best in the game. So if you already have a highly invested normal Cedo with an Arcane, an Exilus adapter, a Catalyst, and many Formas, then you can still comfortably continue playing it and it's still gonna do Steel Path just fine. Really, upgrading from the normal onto the Prime Cedo is only something I would recommend for die-hard fans, and if you specifically want to play around with the idea of going for an Altfire build. Such a build will probably only be possible on the Cedo Prime and not on the normal version. Now, before we end the video, there's one last thing I want to talk about, and that is, I want to give you some general tips that you might want to think about when building your Cedo to get the most damage out of it. One thing that on the Cedo is much more important than on other shotguns is that you do not want to use a base damage Arcane, but rather go for Primary Blight or Primary Frostbite, which give you much more multi-shot. The reason for that is that due to the fact that you're dealing so many different status effects, plus you're probably going to run Galvanized Savvy in combination with the passive, which gives you massive increases in base damage per status proc, that means you're gonna get crazy tons of base damage anyway, just from all your status effects that you're dishing out, so adding another base damage Arcane wouldn't gain you all too much. However, more multi-shot on the other hand means more discs being fired from your Altfire, meaning way more status effects applied, meaning way more carnage for everyone to enjoy. Up next, I'm pretty sure that you're going to use some sort of crit chance mod, and in case that happens to be critical deceleration, your fire rate is going to suffer. And in case you want to compensate for that, then I personally would suggest going for Magnetic Strafe, because while it's not the best fire rate mod out there, it adds magnetic damage to your weapon, and given the aforementioned damage bonus that you get per unique status effect, that means you not only gain the magnetic damage on the mod, but with magnetic now in the mix, that's another status type which will further contribute to you dealing more damage. Up next, if you want to be a little bit more experimental with your build and actually focus on the Altfire dealing the main portion of your damage, then I would highly suggest going for Arcane Avenger plus Arcane Crepuscular on a stealth build on your Warframe, because while the Altfire might be more viable now, it still greatly benefits from additional flat crit chance as well as flat crit damage buffs. And finally, if you haven't already, then check out my recent Mirage build right here, because it is just disgusting with the Cedo on an Altfire build. Another massive shout out to Niels V, Demon Lord Demon Emperor, Emperor Prime, Nost Linux Gaming, Turtlepeer, Lycan Shepherd, Anakanio2, Pepperwolf, Mihawky, Yagis, Hoke Hunter, and all other generous channel members for your continuous support. We see each other, hopefully in the next one, and until then, as always, good loot and have a nice weekend.